20-year-old Colleen Stan decided that she wanted to wish her friend a happy birthday. She left Eugene, Oregon on Thursday, May 19th, 1977 to visit her friend in Westwood, California, which is almost 400 miles away. Colleen did not own a car, and she did not have money for a bus, so she decided to hitchhike to her destination. Hitchhiking was a way of life in the 1970s that many young people adopted. Not even the serial killer Edmund Kemper, who stalked and killed female hitchhikers in San Jose, California, only 4 years earlier, diverted young females from continuing this practice. Colleen knew she could find a free ride easily on Interstate 5, which led into the next state. But she never anticipated that the kind strangers who picked her up would keep her hostage. While the couple did not plan to kill her, they had other sadistic plans in store. Welcome to another episode of Crimson Sin with Tamsin Leigh. I am your host, Tamsin Leigh. A link to today's show notes and the Tamsin Leigh shop and more can be found in the description. Today's case brings us to California, where 20-year-old Colleen Stan was unexpectedly abducted by a married couple and held captive for 7 years. During those 7 years, she experienced the worst abuse and had to live in a box under the couple's bed. If you or someone you know is experiencing sexual abuse or family violence, I have included resources to help you in today's show notes. On May 19th, 1977, Colleen Stan set out to meet her friend 400 miles away in California. She made decent timing as she rode with strangers who were able to take her far. By that afternoon, she was already 350 miles into her journey in a town called Red Bluff. She only had 50 miles left to go before she was at her friend's house. Colleen knew the dangers of hitchhiking and would carefully examine each person who stopped to offer her a ride. She had even turned down 2 people already because she did not feel like they were safe. But then a blue Dodge Colt stopped. Inside was a man, woman, and a baby. The little family were young, clean-cut, and friendly, so she happily climbed into the back seat, thanking the couple. The Hooker family appeared nice enough and kept up a friendly conversation with the 20-year-old. After some time, Colleen noticed Cameron Hooker, the driver, staring at her intently through the rearview mirror. Obviously, this action made her feel uncomfortable. Then the couple stopped at a gas station where Colleen used the bathroom. Something about the situation made her feel like she needed to run. However, she ignored her instincts. This man wouldn't do anything to her in front of his wife and child, right? So Colleen got back in the car, and they handed her a candy bar. After driving for about a mile, Cameron stated that there were some amazing ice caves nearby, and they wanted to make a quick stop to look at them. Colleen agreed to stop with them because she's a hitchhiker looking for adventure, so why not stop and look at breathtaking views? Cameron Hooker then drove down a dirt road that was seemingly in the middle of nowhere when he stopped and turned off the engine to the car. His wife, Janice, then grabbed the baby and got out of the vehicle. Suddenly, Colleen found a knife held against her throat. Cameron ordered the frightened girl to put her hands above her head, asking if she was going to do whatever he said. She was paralyzed with fear. Colleen didn't expect things to unfold like this. Not knowing what else to say, she replied, "Yes." He then handcuffed, blindfolded, bound, and gagged the hitchhiker. This is when Cameron brought out his special creation, placing a large metal-hinged box made from plywood over Colleen's head. This device was a lot larger than what I first imagined. It was made with double walls and contained dense insulation in between these walls. It had a neck hole that nearly choked Colleen once it was fastened on her head. The inside was also carpeted, making it difficult to breathe. Once Cameron's creation was fastened to her head, it completely cut off her senses. She couldn't eat, drink, hear, or see. Colleen then felt Cameron cover her with something heavy that she thought was most likely her sleeping bag. Assuming that Janice and the baby were back in the vehicle, Colleen sensed they were moving further down the winding dirt road they had stopped on. Soon, they stopped to get dinner at a fast food place as Colleen anxiously awaited to learn what the couple planned to do with her. Scared and unable to see anything but darkness, she wondered if she would ever see her family and friends again. The car started moving again for a while until it stopped. She then felt Cameron remove her restraints before nudging her to get out. Once Colleen was inside the house, Cameron removed the box from her head. She, no doubt, felt relieved to have this torturous device taken off. However, that relief would be short-lived. The man then led Colleen down a flight of stairs, leading her into a cellar. Cameron instructed her to stand on top of an ice chest. Afraid of what he would do if she disobeyed, Colleen did as he demanded. He then instructed her to lift her hands over her head, which she did. Using a leather strap, he tied her wrists to the pipes overhead. Colleen was still blindfolded at this point, so she still couldn't see. Cameron began removing her clothing. As he did this, it was apparent something else was about to happen. Cameron then took away the chest that Colleen was standing on. She was now hanging, suspended in the air. Colleen screamed and kicked, demanding to be let go. This is when her captor told her that all his previous victims who did not obey him had their vocal cords cut. And if she continued screaming, he would do the same to her. He then left the room, but when he came back, the nightmare began. Cameron started hitting her in the front and in the back with something that caused Colleen excruciating pain. When she screamed in pain and called for help, he would hit her more. Soon, she realized he was hitting her with a whip. When he finished, he left her hanging alone in the basement again. But as Colleen was suspended in the air, her tiptoes just barely brushed against something on the floor. She could just barely see beneath the blindfold and was able to see a pornographic magazine depicting a naked woman hung up just like she was. Cameron returned again, but this time with his wife. As Colleen hung helplessly in the room, the husband and wife began having sex at her feet. She could not understand what she did to be placed in this nightmare. She had never heard of people doing such evil things before. Eventually, Cameron let Colleen down from her hanging position. Her arms were sore and her body hurt where he had hit her with the whip. But Cameron wasn't going to just let Colleen go. He made her get into another locked box where she discovered she couldn't move. Then he placed the head box back on her head. She began to scream, drawing him back. Her captor then placed a strap over her chest, constricting her breathing even more and forcing her to stop making noise. She was left like that overnight, and she believed that she was going to die. Who were Cameron and Janice Hooker? The couple lived in the quiet town, Red Bluff, California. They appeared as a typical husband and wife, generally keeping to themselves. Cameron worked at a lumber mill and was considered a dependable employee. The couple would rent a home in 1976 from Mr. and Mrs. Leigh, who lived next door. The Leigh couple stated that the Hookers appeared to be just a young couple starting a family. Cameron graduated from Red Bluff High School in 1972 and found employment at Diamond Lands Corporation. In 1973, he met 15-year-old Janice, who suffered from epilepsy. Because of her condition, Cameron believed she was desperate to take any man. This belief was furthered by the fact that she surrendered to whatever he asked of her. Cameron Hooker enjoyed violent pornography, which he would try out on Janice. He persuaded her to allow him to undress her and tie her to a tree, suspended by her wrists. It was uncomfortable for her, but the affection he showed toward her afterward was this great reward to her. Sexual acts such as this became routine for the couple. By 1975, Cameron and Janice were married. This is when Cameron became more comfortable with Janice and believed he could do whatever he pleased with her because Janice belonged to him. He then made his wife more of a partner in his sexual fantasies. This is a common theme amongst many female accomplices of sexual sadists. The male's fantasy gradually becomes a shared fantasy which motivates both partners. As the male isolates the female, she becomes more dependent on him, and they lose their nerve to speak for themselves. These men generally become tired of the woman's submissiveness and start looking for someone more exciting, something new. For Cameron Hooker, he wanted a young female slave, but he needed his wife's help in obtaining one. As in cases such as this one, the female fears losing the man's love, so they go along with their desires. However, when this request arises, the female sees this as an opportunity to reduce the abuse she's experiencing by placing the man's attention on someone else. In the case of Cameron and Janice Hooker, she had one request. If Cameron got her pregnant, then he could go do whatever he wanted. He happily agreed to the deal and began fantasizing about the future. Cameron had to prepare before he could put his plan into action. He had to find a way to isolate his slave and prevent his neighbors from hearing her cries until she knew her place. This led him to design and make boxes that he would use on Colleen Stan. As the months went by, Janice became pregnant, had her baby, and started to raise it. When the time was right and Cameron had everything ready, he drove around with his wife's help to make him appear safe while coaxing an unsuspecting victim. The couple, along with their baby, went out searching for one of what Cameron hoped would become a plethora of female sex slaves. The next morning, after Colleen's nightmarish events occurred, she was exhausted. She hardly slept at all and couldn't help but wonder what could happen next. Cameron came in, removing the head box and then opening the body box. She breathed in relief. She could actually breathe again. But this relief quickly dissipated as she was afraid of her captor. Would he let her go? What could possibly happen next? Colleen wasn't allowed to eat until near the end of the day when she was given a meal of water and potatoes. Cameron then hung her for a while and eventually put the head box back on her. She had no idea when he would come to her or when he left. Nor did she have any idea of what was in store for her. She was allowed to use a bedpan to relieve herself. Then she was stretched out on a rack where she lay immobile for hours. It was another day before she was allowed to eat again, with Cameron forcing her to drink water and eat an egg salad sandwich. She willfully ate one, but because it was a hot and humid day, she refused the second serving. This angered Cameron, who told her that she ought to be grateful. Again, she declined, stating that she was full. However, she soon learned that as a slave, she was told what to do, no matter what. Due to her protests, Cameron hung her up again, using some leather cuffs, and whipped her until she lost consciousness. When she was finally released from this torture, Colleen still wasn't hungry. Even though she was in extreme pain, she forced herself to eat the rest of the food. When she finished, Cameron tied her up, placed the head box back on her, and left. This became the new normal for her. Every day she would receive one meal, be tortured, experience isolation and uncertainty. After Colleen had been missing for 4 days, her friends in Eugene contacted her family who had not seen or heard from her. Everyone grew concerned. Colleen's parents found out that their daughter planned on going to Westwood on May 19th, but after calling her friend, they soon found out that she never made it. Colleen was the type to keep in touch, so on May 23rd, her parents filed a missing persons report. Colleen Stan was a divorcee, having dropped out of high school and married when she was 17. However, the couple only lasted a year before they divorced. She then moved back in with her parents in Riverside, California, and finished her high school degree. After this, she moved in with her friends in Eugene, Oregon. Because she was a divorcee, Colleen's ex-husband, Tom Smith, was naturally the first suspect in her disappearance. However, all anyone knew of Tom was that he was from Ohio. He also never came after Colleen before, so there was little reason to suspect that he would just randomly come after her. Colleen's family eventually lost hope in finding their daughter. They knew something horrible had to have happened to her. She was always considerate enough to let her parents know where she was. Her mother frequently called the sheriff's department in Eugene, but they never had anything new to tell her. While Colleen remained hostage, she very rarely saw Janice or the baby. Most of the time, she was left chained up, blindfolded, and stretched out naked on a rack. Cameron frequently came to whip her. Sometimes when he strung her up, he'd take pictures of her and develop the film himself. Every once in a while, the torture escalated, where he would hold Colleen's head underwater until she would pass out. She often wondered if he was going to kill her. Occasionally, Colleen would ask him when he would let her go, to which he always replied, "Soon." While Cameron's dark fantasies were unrealistic, he did have a somewhat practical side. He knew keeping Colleen chained up all day could harm her health. He had to come up with another way to keep his slave under control. For 10 days, he worked on a box that looked like a coffin. When he was finished, he placed her sleeping bag inside. He shoved her earplugs in her ears and chained her up as he stuffed her inside the box. She would remain in this box until he wanted her. This continued for over a month. Colleen was not allowed to shower or clean up in any way. Within this time, she had lost 20 pounds and stopped menstruating. Her entire world became that box. But the box was obviously uncomfortable, so Cameron equipped it with a blower to provide circulation. However, this still did not control the temperature, so Colleen was actually able to determine what time of the day it was by the temperature inside the box. Cameron's bondage sessions with her grew longer and eventually became even more frequent and sadistic. He would use a heat lamp to burn her skin, or would choose to electrocute her. He would also go on to strangle her, and the whip was always a favorite of his. Cameron was sexually excited by all of this torture he made Colleen endure. While he did her, he did not have intercourse with her. One day, Cameron built a tiny cell that fit under the staircase. Colleen would be left in this cell, unshackled but still blindfolded. This new arrangement was to put her to work. After closing her inside, Cameron would remove the blindfold and order her to shell nuts or do macrame. Even though this was still captivity, Colleen started to feel freedom. She could actually move around. Colleen would spend her 21st birthday in her coffin. She would also spend Christmas and New Year's Day in the coffin. It had been 8 months of nothing but torture and uncertainty. Then something new happened. Cameron received underground sadomasochistic newspapers called Inside News. The January 1st, 1978 edition contained an article entitled, "They Sell Themselves Body and Soul When They Sign the Slavery Contract." This got Cameron's wheels turning because obviously he wanted complete and total control over his slave. He would then set out to create a contract that would legally bind Colleen. Her slave name was Kay, and he signed the contract using the alias Michael Powers. By the end of January, he made Colleen read the article and then sign the contract as Kay Powers. As she read through it, she was absolutely disgusted and believed it was pure evil. However, Cameron forced her to sign it. If she didn't, he told her he would sign it for her and make her wish she had done it herself. The contract detailed the rules she was expected to follow, and by signing the contract, she agreed to them. Some of the rules that she was forced to follow included referring to Cameron as master and to keep her body open at all times for his satisfaction. If she did not obey, Cameron told her that he wouldn't be allowed to keep her, and she could be sent to someone else who was not as nice as he was. Cameron told Colleen he paid $1,500 to register her with the slave company. He explained people who worked for this company were watching them all the time, and they even bugged the house. He continued to lie, telling her that these people knew who Colleen's relatives were and would kill them if she ever disobeyed him. Cameron furthered this by telling her that even Janice was his slave, and if either of them should ever attempt to escape, then the company would punish both girls by nailing their hands to a beam and leaving them hanging for days. From then on, Colleen was known throughout the Hooker household as Kay. She learned to hide her emotions because if she showed any at all during Cameron's sadistic bondage and torture sessions, it would excite him and the assault would last even longer. When she was forced into these situations with her captor, Colleen would escape using her mind. Eventually, Colleen was allowed to perform household chores like cooking, washing dishes, and cleaning the house. But even during this, she had to remain ever present in Cameron's demands. If he yelled, "Attention!" she was to strip off her clothes and stand on her tiptoes, reaching her hands to the top of the doorway between the living room and dining room. Colleen wore a slave collar and even had a supposed registration card from the slave company. To keep Colleen submissive and crush any attempt at running away, he would tell her atrocious stories of things that happened to slaves who had disobeyed their masters. Cameron told her one slave had her tongue taken out with a soldering gun, and another had been pulled limb from limb, while another had her fingers torn off. Just as the torture escalated, so did the molestation. One night, Cameron brought Colleen to his marital bed. Janice tried to go along with her husband's twisted fantasy, but decided not to participate and go to another room. This was the first time Cameron raped Colleen. After that night, he regularly had sex with her. He began trusting that his tactics were working and that Colleen would not run away the first chance she got. So he allowed her to spend more time in her cell under the stairs and would also allow her to sometimes sleep there. However, this small inkling of freedom was short-lived because the Hookers would soon move into a trailer. The new house and land provided the family with more privacy. To keep Colleen captive, Cameron had to design a ventilated box that fit under his and Janice's waterbed. She was allowed out of this box for an hour each day so she could clean her bedpan, brush her teeth, and sometimes wash her hair. On the days Cameron had off from work, she was allowed to do work in the yard outside under his watchful eye and constant reminders that if she tried to run, the company was always watching. Neighbors who had seen and spoke with Colleen thought she was a live-in babysitter for the family. At no time did she ask any of them for help. He had her so afraid and brainwashed that she didn't even dare ask anyone for help. Eventually, she was even allowed to go jogging, and she always came back. To further showcase Cameron's hold on Colleen, there was a time when Janice lost her job, and Cameron needed to find a way to bridge that financial gap, so he took Colleen to Reno and other towns to make her beg for money in the street. Colleen was humiliated doing this, but she had no choice, as the punishment would be severe. While out and about begging for money, she never asked anyone to help her. While Colleen was locked away in her box under Cameron and Janice's waterbed, privacy was non-existent. She could hear everything that was going on in the bed above her. There was no privacy for Colleen or Janice as Cameron pulled the strings. One year for Christmas, Colleen asked Cameron for a Bible, which he got for her. Every chance she had, she would read it. He continued to fill her head with scary tales about the slave company and exposed her to things that would tighten his hold on her. For instance, he pierced her labia, claiming it was for identification purposes, but later told her it was symbolic of a wedding ring. He also confided in her that someday he hoped to have children with her. In 1980, 3 years after Colleen was abducted, Cameron let her go out with Janice. The girls had some drinks, met some men, and went home with them. Janice was given Cameron's consent to keep having an affair with one of these men. Once Janice found a job, Colleen was left alone at the Hooker house to babysit their children. She was not tied up, but still did nothing to leave. During this time, she was not forced into her coffin-like box. Instead, she was chained to the toilet and made to sleep on the floor. While this was still uncomfortable, you can imagine it was still better than that box. Janice would eventually bring her work home and have Colleen help her, which brought more money into the household. However, the women would occasionally fight because Janice was jealous of Cameron's attention toward Colleen. The wife wanted her husband to let Colleen go. Instead, Cameron forced his wife to quit her job so she could stay home and watch the children while Colleen returned to the box under their bed. He further convinced Colleen that he paid the slave company $30,000 to ensure her safety and protection. This was obviously a huge financial sacrifice for him, so she needed to behave. Reinforcing his dominance over her, he made Colleen point a gun down her throat and commanded her to pull the trigger. She did not know if it was loaded or not, but she still did what she was told. Because she had been a very obedient slave, Cameron allowed her to write 3 letters to her sisters, so they knew she was alive. Before mailing these letters, he checked the contents to ensure she did not reveal what was happening or seeking help. He knew she missed her family and allowed her to call home from a payphone. Eventually, he arranged for her to visit her family. Cameron told her that this was a rare treat that the company was permitting, but they would be monitoring the reunion very carefully. Before being taken on her trip, she was left inside the box for an entire week. He warned Colleen that the company may put her through some tests before she could visit her family, and described horrifying things that the company did to other runaway slaves. However, these tests never happened. Instead, Cameron simply warned her that if she told anyone about her situation, the company would rush in and grab her. Colleen was instructed to tell her family that he was a computer programmer she had been dating. On March 20th, 1981, she was able to visit her family under the watchful eye of her captor. All of her family were excited and relieved to see her, but her father was shocked to see how thin and haggard she looked. But the family did not question anything because they were scared to lose her again. They did not understand why she completely cut off communication with them for 3.5 years. They were afraid that they had offended her in some way or did something to cause her to disappear for all of those years. So the family left many questions unspoken, walking on eggshells so they could keep in contact with her. When asked where she had been the whole time, Colleen kept her answers vague. But again, her family didn't want to press her for more information. Her mother even stated, "She gave us no information on where she'd been or on where she'd be going. We were all afraid to sit her down and get it out of her. We were afraid we would lose her again." Colleen was ecstatic to see her family again, but she didn't know how long this visit would be. She had hoped she could spend the whole weekend with them. This uncertainty made every minute with them count. The following morning, she attended church with her mother and to see other relatives. But then, everything was over. Only 24 hours after being dropped off, Cameron called to tell her he would be there to pick her up soon. When Cameron picked her up to take her back to Red Bluff, Colleen told her family that he was her fiancé. Her sister took a picture of them together, and everyone thought she looked genuinely happy with him. No one knew just how badly Colleen wanted to tell them everything and beg them for their help. After this, her freedom was gone. She spent most of her time inside the box for the next 3 years. During this time, she had actually managed to kick open the bolted door. However, she was so afraid of what the consequences may be that she told Cameron what she had done. He repaired the box without punishing her and then forced her back inside. As she spent all of her time in the box, her health deteriorated. Her hair started falling out as she lost more and more weight. Cameron became bored with Colleen because his true intent was to have numerous slaves, not just one. But to have what he desired, he needed more space than what the trailer provided. He decided to fix the room issue. He would simply have to build a dungeon. Cameron had Colleen help dig a deep hole in the yard for this dungeon. He put in a floor and built brick walls. The room was completed in November 1983. Of course, this would prove to have its own problems. After moving Colleen into the dungeon, he learned that it flooded. So back to the box, Colleen went. But all of this time and attention Cameron was giving to Colleen angered his wife. Janice was not happy that her husband was regularly having sex with his slave. To turn her anger away from her husband, she read the Bible, which became a regular thing for her. As she read it, Janice became more and more ashamed about the things going on in her home. When Colleen turned 27, she was used to the life she was forced into. 7 years into captivity with no hope in sight. She believed that this was her life from now on. She was now permitted to have a job outside the Hooker house, working at King's Lodge Motel. The money she earned from her job was said to be for her to purchase a small house near the Hookers. As Janice began reading the Bible more and more, she also started attending church, which Colleen would sometimes accompany her. Occasionally, Cameron would go as well, but it wasn't because he was moved by religion, but rather to emphasize his ownership over Janice and Colleen. He would even try to convince the women that this arrangement was what God wanted. Still, Janice knew the situation was wrong, leading her to seek advice from her pastor and other members of her church. Of course, she didn't confide exactly what was going on. Instead, she made it appear as a love triangle. Everyone in the church told her that God would not approve, causing her to start making plans. Janice picked Colleen up on August 9th, 1984 from her job at King's Lodge. She then told Colleen that there was no company or slave contract. Everything that Cameron had told her was a lie. Colleen listened to Janice's confession and realized there was nothing keeping her bound to Cameron. She stayed at the Hooker household that night, asking Cameron if her and Janice could sleep alone. He agreed to this, and the women began planning Colleen's escape. Colleen called her father to ask for money to buy a ticket to come home. He immediately wired her the money. While Cameron was at work, she went to the bus station and called him. She informed him that she knew he had lied to her the entire time, and she was leaving. He began sobbing, but nothing he did kept Colleen there. When Colleen returned home, she did not say anything to authorities about what she had endured for the past 7 years. She also would not tell her family and kept in contact with Janice by phone. Janice asked her to keep the whole thing quiet until she knew what she was going to do. Janice wanted to leave her husband because she was scared of him, but it wasn't as simple as buying a ticket for her. At first, Cameron and Janice separated, but eventually got back together. They then started to get rid of evidence that Colleen had been in their home. When Colleen would call them, Cameron begged for her to come back, but she refused and would keep telling them that she had no intention of going to the police. However, she would not be able to keep everything she had gone through a secret from everyone. Colleen would give her family hints about the things she had endured during her disappearance. She even told Cameron she forgave him and would pray for him to stay away from his life of sin. Her family would urge her to go to authorities, but she wouldn't. Eventually, the day came when Janice left her husband for good, and the guilt she had would eat away at her. She needed to talk to someone about everything. One day, she confided everything to a receptionist at a doctor's office. After finally getting all of this off of her chest, she worried about what would happen next. She worried what would happen to her 2 daughters. Janice went straight to her pastor and confessed everything that happened with Colleen Stan. With her permission, the pastor called the authorities. Janice would speak to Detective Shamblin and mention another woman's name, a woman who disappeared in 1976. Marie Elizabeth Spanhake was walking home from a flea market and was never seen or heard from again. To prove her husband's involvement in the young woman's disappearance, Janice accurately depicted details of when Marie was last seen, along with other things, and even called her by her nickname, Marlies. After Marie had an argument with her boyfriend, she headed home when, according to Janice, she and Cameron followed her. She claimed that her husband placed the head box on Marie and then brought her to their home. Just like with Colleen, he had led his victim down to the cellar, suspending her from the basement rafters and torturing her. But Marie wouldn't stop screaming during all of it, so Cameron attempted to remove her vocal cords. Janice claims that her husband then strangled the woman and the 2 buried her in a shallow grave at a state park. Prosecutors knew they needed Janice's help to pin charges on Cameron, so they offered her a deal. If she testified against her estranged husband, she would be granted immunity from prosecution. However, even with Janice's assistance in the case, authorities were unable to locate Marie Elizabeth Spanhake's remains. Even with Janice's claims that Marlies was abducted, tortured, and killed by her husband, without the evidence they needed, neither suspect could be charged with the crime, and her disappearance remains a cold case to this day. But Janice was still helpful in Colleen Stan's case. She told police how her husband brainwashed Colleen to keep her under his control. Her testimony provided a lot of insight and detail into the case, and she admitted to helping Cameron destroy evidence. Authorities questioned the couple's neighbors, who insisted that Cameron was a good-tempered, nice, and normal person. While detectives were questioning neighbors, Detective Shamblin went to Riverside to talk to Colleen. He found her to be coherent, but distressingly detached. Colleen supported Janice's claims, but not everyone thought Colleen's accounts were sufficient. Why would someone who was being held hostage and tortured, who was given plenty of opportunities to escape, just never even try? Why wouldn't she contact authorities as soon as she left? This made her accounts against Cameron questionable. But soon investigators would find slides that fell out of a sketchbook taken from the Hooker's residence. One of the slides was a photograph of the slave contract. Investigators also found slides of Janice being hung and bound in a variety of different ways. 2 rolls of undeveloped film were sent to the FBI and contained pictures of Colleen in captivity, including images of her naked and hooked to the ceiling or chained to the rack. On November 18, 1984, Detective Shamblin arrested Cameron on charges including kidnapping, rape, and sodomy, along with other things. Soon, the media received word about the whole ordeal, making it become a national, high-profile case. Still, those who thought they knew Cameron Hooker did not believe he was capable of doing something so awful. Cameron would also plead not guilty to all the counts against him. The prosecution soon found that there was a statute of limitation with the kidnapping charge. 7 years had passed, and the statute only allowed for 3. Also, there was a lot of pushback from the defense, as well as others who pointed out that Colleen voluntarily stayed with the Hookers. They also pointed out that the only reason Janice turned her husband in was because she was jealous of Colleen. Colleen remained quiet upon questioning and showed little intent at any form of revenge against her captor, providing the defense with more firepower. What also cast a lot of doubt was Janice's side of the tale during the preliminary hearing. But with the evidence collected, the judge decided there was more than enough for the case to go to trial. Further searches of both homes where the Hookers lived with Colleen found more incriminating evidence, as officers discovered whips, leather restraints, the head boxes, the racks, and the hooks in the ceiling used to suspend Colleen. They also found numerous publications depicting violent and sadistic pornography. Very little was known in the 80s about the effects of brainwashing and psychological trauma experienced by abductees. So, proving that Colleen was brainwashed was not going to be easy. The prosecution interviewed 6 experts on the procedure and would retain Dr. Chris Hatcher. He worked on the effects of terrorism, studied the People's Temple in Jonestown, and had written articles on the psychology of hostages. Investigators and Dr. Hatcher made a timeline across the 7 years. They looked at the photos and even went over how the headbox and other contraptions were used. Colleen remained passive throughout the entire process. The defense tried its best to reach a plea deal based on the fact that the sexual acts were consensual, but prosecutors refused to agree to a deal, wanting to try Cameron Hooker for his monstrous crimes. The defense tried various delay tactics as they had their own experts examine Colleen and Janice. But eventually a trial date was set. The trial against Cameron Hooker began on September 24th, 1985 in Redwood City in San Mateo County Superior Court. He was charged with a total of 16 felony counts. 1 of kidnapping, 7 of rape, 1 of forced oral copulation, 1 of forced penetration with a foreign object, 1 of forced sodomy, 3 of false imprisonment, and 2 of abducting to live in an illicit relationship. The prosecution started the trial with a powerful opening statement, referencing Cameron's favorite movie, The Story of O, in which a young woman is abducted by a sadistic master and turned into a slave so compliant she was willing to end her life for him. Prosecutors hoped this reference was dramatic enough to clarify how someone could be transformed into someone without a will of their own. They furthered that Cameron had broken Colleen Stan's will. The defense instead highlighted the issues in which Colleen voluntarily stayed in the Hooker household and had a relationship with Cameron. Janice was the first witness called to the stand to answer questions. She explained Cameron's plan, the slave company, the slave contract, and Cameron's whips. She also admitted to helping him destroy most of the evidence and spoke of the dungeon he tried and continued to try building, all while planning on acquiring more slaves. The jury was then shown pictures the FBI had processed, along with Cameron's pornography collection, a replica of the headbox, and the box Cameron built for Colleen to sleep in underneath his bed. Before and during the trial, many people and some jurors tested out the box to see what it was like. All agreed it felt like they were inside a coffin. Not only was it awkward and just uncomfortable, but even being closed in it for only a few minutes was distressing. How could Colleen spend most of 7 years inside this box? Prosecutors even went the extra mile, building a full-scale dungeon, like the one Colleen had been forced to dig a hole for. Colleen would soon take the stand to tell her story, but she found it to be a very difficult thing to do. Her performance on the stand appeared to leave many questioning her accusations. To emphasize how the headbox worked, prosecutors brought the contraption into the courtroom and placed it over a woman's head. This sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Seeing pictures of it or seeing the creation in person did not make as much of an impact as witnessing the mechanics of how it was used in person. Prosecutors continued their chilling tale of Colleen's captivity, explaining that while it appeared she willfully stayed, she was always fearful of the slave company. While many looked at her actions as being willing, she was forced to stay, as she was told that these people with this company would kill her family or torture her by, taking limbs off of her. Colleen's sister Bonnie testified during the trial to tell the jury of her sister's appearance when she was allowed to visit in 1981. The purpose of Bonnie telling her story was not only to receive her accounts, but also to show the jury what Colleen should have closely resembled. When side by side, it was clear to see that Colleen suffered through a lot physically in those 7 years. A physician named Dr. Vivekes was questioned about his findings while on the stand and stated that the scars on Colleen's ankles and wrists were from restraints. He further detailed the burn marks Colleen had from being electrocuted and detailed Colleen's pierced labia. After the physician explained Colleen's physical injuries to the jury, psychologist Chris Hatcher described how mind control worked. First, he explained the dynamics of sadomasochism, focusing on the dominant and submissive personalities, as well as the excitement the supposed master receives from someone submitting to his whims. He furthered how the effects of sudden kidnapping, death threats, physical abuse, being forced to live in a small box, the loss of control of bodily functions, and the lack of communication all accumulated into effectively breaking down Colleen's will. Dr. Hatcher testified that after careful examination of the crime scene and through the extensive interviews he conducted with Colleen, he believed that she was coerced into staying with the Hookers. He believed that Colleen's values, identity, and her view of the world had been altered by Cameron's abuse, threats, and isolation. Stockholm Syndrome was brought up quite a lot during this case, which it does sum it up pretty well in the sense that under the extreme stress experienced during captivity, the most prone to develop the syndrome are tortured prisoners, kidnapping victims, and abused spouses. Those who experience this appear to become involved to some degree with his or her captors and are known to even consent to abuse and captivity. That person may also express feelings of affection toward their captor, which surprises a lot of outsiders. And it makes them wonder if their accusations are even true. How can you have sympathy for someone who treats you so poorly? Experts who study Stockholm Syndrome suggest that the person freezes as a way to avoid further torture and yields to try to appease the captor. If the captor takes care of basic needs, then the victim may feel gratitude, bordering on affection. These victims are generally more susceptible to suggestion and can become sympathetic toward their captor because their whole world becomes about them. With having sympathy comes being able to identify with their captor. As there seems to be no way to escape, the victim then either falls in love with their abductor or acts as if they do. This is all sort of like a coping mechanism. If you see no way of escape, then you're going to do whatever you can to provide safety and comfort. Dr. Hatcher then used Cameron Hooker's own pornography to show the jury the steps used to take an ordinary girl and turn her into a sex slave. Cameron Hooker took the stand on October 18th to explain his side of the story. He admitted to kidnapping and described his fantasy of slaves in bondage. But he tried to garner sympathy from the court by telling them that Colleen had been ill from substance abuse withdrawal and that he was worried about her. He claimed that Colleen had fallen in love with him while he was simply just caring for her. He further stated that he found the slave contract in a magazine and explained his obedience drills. He admitted to telling Colleen little stories about the company. Even with this admission, he stated that all sexual acts and the photographs taken of her were consensual. After this, there were a lot of unexpected revelations brought to the court, all backed with hard evidence. This included the fact that after Colleen left the Hookers, she called them 29 times, one of which lasted over an hour long. The defense took this behavior as Colleen having some attachment to the couple. Needless to say, this news surprised the jury. Why would someone held against their will even contact the people who abducted them? The defense also had Cameron state that his wife had been jealous of their relationship and had witnessed one of these verbal arguments. Cameron's defense believed if they could have the jury consider only the kidnapping charges, then Cameron would be set free because the statute of limitations on the kidnapping charges had already run out. The defense strategically worked to make Janice appear to have been a jealous wife, which made her turn on her husband and lie. They brought up the outing Janice and Colleen had when they went out to a bar and went home with men, as well as a ski trip they took together. The defense also presented the court with a stack of letters that Colleen had written to Cameron, where she freely expressed her love for him and her desire to have children with him. One such letter stated, "I seem to be falling deeper and deeper into love with you with each passing day." The letter also stated that she did not want to leave him. The prosecution was shocked by these letters. They had no idea they even existed, which caused them to confront Colleen. She simply stated she had completely forgotten about them. However, she maintained that Cameron made her write the letters, and she did so out of fear. She furthered she would tell him that she loved him because the better she treated him, the better he treated her. But this evidence was still incredibly damaging to their case. A clinical associate professor of psychiatry, Dr. Lund, also took the stand and dismissed the idea of brainwashing. He did not believe any of the claims brought against Cameron, and also implied that Colleen was lying about her accusations. More specifically, that prolonged durations of immobility would cause involuntary muscle spasms. Prosecutors argued that Colleen was allowed to exercise, such as working in the garden, digging a hole for the dungeon, and that time that she was allowed to go jogging. Not to mention that by the end of all of this, she was allowed to hold a job. In the end, it was brought to light that Dr. Lund failed to thoroughly research the case. He never interviewed Colleen or Janice. He only listened to recordings and interviewed Cameron. These actions, coupled with other duties he neglected, caused him to lose his credibility. On October 25th, the defense rested. Closing statements from the prosecution focused on the charges of kidnapping, rape, and sexual assault, while the defense focused on Colleen's phone calls, her visit home, and the love letters. So, was Colleen a captive, or did she willingly stay with Cameron Hooker? The jury was not impressed by Cameron Hooker's arrogance and lack of remorse during the trial, but they seemed confused by the bond Colleen held with her captors. While the prosecution presented a lot of evidence for the crimes committed, they did not present definitive proof that Colleen had no choice in the matter. The jury looked over the evidence and discussed the issues for 3 days. On the 3rd day, they sent word that they were hung on one of the counts. But on Halloween, they finally reached a verdict. Cameron Hooker was found guilty of 10 felony counts, including kidnapping, rape, along with other sex offenses. It was noted that as Cameron listened to the verdict, he showed no emotion. On November 22nd, he was sentenced to consecutive terms, totaling 60 years. On top of that, he received 1 to 25 years for kidnapping. If he were to serve the maximum time he was sentenced to, then he would have to serve 104 years. His lawyer immediately began the appeals process. After receiving his sentence, Colleen expressed how glad she was that Cameron Hooker would never be able to hurt anyone else the way he had hurt her. She was still able to move on with her life after everything. Colleen found a job, went to therapy, and went to college for an accounting degree. She built herself back up again, got married, and had a child. Colleen also became a crisis hotline volunteer for domestic abuse and sexual assault, while also warning young people about the dangers of hitchhiking. Janice reverted to her maiden name. She became a registered associate social worker and has worked as a mental health professional. Cameron was originally ineligible for parole until 2023, but was able to have his hearing date moved up to 2015 by California's Elderly Parole Program. On April 16, 2015, his request for parole was denied, and he would not be eligible for another hearing until 2030. In March 2021, Colleen was contacted about the possibility of Cameron receiving parole due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Authorities scheduled a hearing for September 2021 to decide if Cameron Hooker should be classified as a sexually violent predator, which would result in his civil commitment to a state hospital. His hearing to determine this has been delayed multiple times. His next hearing for this will be held on March 9th, 2024. If it is not delayed again, I will post an update in the show notes. What did you think of today's case? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like and follow to stay up to date with the latest episodes. Thank you for listening and your support. Stay safe, and I will see you for the next episode. Bye.